Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Jon Ferro, along with Lisa Abramowicz and Anne-Marie Hordern. Join us each day for insight from the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. From our global headquarters in New York City, we are live on Bloomberg Television weekday mornings from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app. We've all got questions. Top of the pile, the number one question that we all have after Saturday night: how on earth did this happen? Joining us now is Republican Congressman Mike Turner and Chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thank you for being with us this morning, sir. I understand you have a briefing with the FBI a little bit later today. What are the questions you have for them, sir?
Right, Jonathan, well, certainly that is the first up question. How could this ever happen? As we're learning more about how these events unfolded, it becomes even more unexplainable and unbelievable that this individual would have had the ability to pull this off by himself, that this vulnerability would have been there at the event, and that he would have had access to it and the ability to execute in a manner which put Donald Trump's life at risk. Thank God Donald Trump is alive, and his iconic rise from the stage to show America that he's alive and that, you know, his strength was shown. That certainly plays a tremendous amount of impact on world leaders to see, you know, the strength of Donald Trump.
Chairman, this isn't the first Secret Service security lapse we've seen in our country. And something we've been grappling with all morning is this question of, is it a resource issue or is it a protocol issue? Do you have an understanding?
Yeah, those are two of the questions, right? But on the protocol issue, it also goes to why is it that he was not shot until after he was shooting, when we obviously know there were a number of individuals who identified both his location and that he had a weapon. Then also on the issue of resources, why wasn't the perimeter larger? Why weren't there more people that were there protecting former President Donald Trump? All of those are questions we're going to get to, but the reality is that in the end, this is something that's going to land on somebody's desk as they're responsible, and we want to find, you know, who that is and how these decisions were made. But also how this came about, where this kid, who seemingly did nothing in his life up to this point that was extraordinary, was able to take advantage of what was an obvious vulnerability.
Right, and the distance, less than 450 feet away from a former president. Congressman, your committee, what role can that play in this investigation?
Well, certainly we'll be working with the Government Oversight Committee, of which I'm a member, the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and even Homeland Security Committee. This will go across several, as it should. This is going to be an unfolding investigation because it is going to involve not only agencies but individuals, and certainly the circumstances of this shooter and how he ended up on that roof.
Congressman, considering that we don't have the answers to these questions, and considering the Republican National Convention is still going forward, I have to ask you this, and I understand it's a difficult question to answer, but how on earth can we have any confidence that we have sufficient security at an event like the one we are having this week when we don't have the answers to the questions we all have about Saturday evening?
Right. Well, I've called for, reassessment of the security plans for both conventions, and I think the perimeters should be enlarged. I think you were just hearing from your own reporter that, in fact, the perimeter is being enlarged. That does make a difference. The fact that you can control the space, you can control access, that certainly lessens overall the risk.
Representative, you've long served this country with an eye on security, even serving as the president on NATO at one point for the U.S. As you look at this moment, how do you judge it to its historical comparisons of fragility and concern for this country?
Well, I think, first off, the call for unity is absolutely real. And I think it's been one that has been going on even before this event occurred, but it certainly is crystallizing in this event. And right now you have Biden, who's looking to going in his convention where his party's not even sure they want him to be the candidate, and Donald Trump going to his convention where his convention is going to be about why he should be president of the United States, while they grapple with whether or not Biden should even be the candidate. And they're going to be picking him to be the candidate because of his strength, because of his commitment to this country. And also there's going to be a tremendous contrast between, Biden's failure on the border, Biden's failure on national security, Biden's failure on the world stage. And of course, we all saw last night why his staff say that he should not do anything after 8 o'clock. In that speech he gave, he was short of breath. He had hardly ability to finish each sentence. He misspoke. He misstated things. But overall, he's not the candidate of unity. He did not apologize. He took the opportunity to campaign in the middle of the speech, and he certainly didn't offer anybody anything who wasn't already for Joe Biden, and that's just a few.
Chairman, as you are the head of the Intel Committee, I want to ask you about these blinking lights we keep hearing from the FBI director. For months, he's been sounding the alarm that there are flashing lights when it comes to potential terror attack or issues, events at home here domestically in the United States. Do you see the same concerns?
Absolutely. We see the same intelligence. I've said repeatedly that I agree with the director. I was very concerned as we go into this final election season that there are foreign nationals with terrorist ties in our country and what that could mean for the security, both for our conventions and for our candidates. I think it's certainly a continuing threat, and it goes right directly to Joe Biden's failure of leadership and the fact that our border is open. The director has made it clear that the intelligence indicates that individuals who are affiliated with ISIS and international terrorist organizations have made their way across Biden's open border. They're in the United States, and they pose a risk to both Americans and certainly to our electoral process this year.
But to be clear, some of the threat is coming from inside the House, too. You look at the events over the weekend, it's not just immigration, it's here, it's domestic terrorism. That's what some of the reports also show, Congressman. So what needs to happen? What needs to change there?
Well, first off, that doesn't that pales in comparison to organized structured terrorists who are located in the United States, who are communicating with outside terrorist groups and organizations, who are actively looking at ways in which to carry out terrorist acts. And that is what the director is saying. And those individuals are individuals that the Biden administration has led across the border. The director has said so. Certainly the intelligence indicates it. And that is the threat and vulnerability that is a risk to our national security directly from Biden's policies at the border.
Just to be clear, are you saying that domestic terrorism is not a concern at this moment?
No, I didn't say that. You tried to diminish the fact that a chosen Biden policy that allowed terrorists into our country who are actively a threat to our country is easily comparable to any individual like this shooter who found his way upon this roof. It's not. The reality is that you have the director of the FBI running across the country telling everybody that we have this strong threat because he's not getting anywhere with the administration. He's not getting the border closed. He's not getting these people rounded up. He's not getting these people identified and arrested. And that's why he's telling you, because the administration isn't listening. They're not recognizing the threat that they have placed this country in.
Chairman, I want to be clear. I'm not attempting to put words in your mouth at all. I'm only trying to address both issues. And I hear you loud and clear on this one issue. So tell me, in 2025, from an administration, what do you need to see to make it clear that we're not sleepwalking through threats like this? Again, I understand the foreign component, what you're saying, loud and clear. But in terms of domestic issues, how someone can get so close to a presidential nominee, to a foreign president,
right.
Again,
well,
for people
obviously
here.
Not comparable, right? They're not comparable.
Yes.
And we don't know yet the story of how this kid got here, right? We don't know how this shooter got on this roof. Now, I'm very skeptical that he ended up on this roof having done nothing else in his life that is extraordinary, that he would have been able to accomplish this on his own. We'll have to see. We'll have to see the circumstances that resulted in almost Donald Trump being assassinated on the stage at a political rally. That is what the investigation is going to be, and we don't know the circumstances.
And hopefully we get some details as that investigation goes on.
Great.
Congressman, before you go, I want to talk about the VP sweepstakes with you. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that and you can offer your opinion. Congressman, do you have a preferred candidate? What would you expect now to see in the vice president for Donald Trump?
I prefer the candidate that Donald Trump picks. I think Donald Trump is going to do an excellent job of putting together both his vice president and ultimately his cabinet, as he did last time. He's got a great focus on what needs to be done to change the direction of this country, to close the border, to address this out-of-control spending that's resulting in unbelievable inflation, and also to reinstill our stature in the international community as a result of this failed foreign policy of the Biden administration. I think he's laser focused, and I believe he's going to pick a great team.
Congressman, hopefully we can talk again soon. Congressman Mike Turner, thanks for making time for us on a busy, busy morning for him, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Goldman Sachs right now, a bit firmer in the pre-market, up by a little more than 1%. Ken Leon of CFRA joins us now for more. So Ken, I can go through the names again. We've heard from JP, Citi, Wells Fargo, Goldman just now. What's your takeaway this morning?
Well, I think investors begin to pivot and move away from Friday's concerns, which were the consumer or rates or net interest income, to today. It's really about the markets. It's about investment banking, and also Goldman's ability really to be top in the league table. So what we see with these results, obviously a revenue earnings beat, but we have resilient businesses that are also in position to gain wallet share. The asset and wealth management business, David Solomon's going to speak about the increasing alternative investments, over $300 billion, which possibly gives Goldman stocks a higher multiple, that whole segment. In investment banking, we haven't spoken enough last Friday, but today we are seeing improvements in equity underwriting, and also debt underwriting was a 3-year high going for the second quarter. Lastly, all the M&A, while it's okay, it's likely to do better in the second half of this year, because most of the financial sponsors, those are the private equity firms, have been on the sidelines, and they need to exit in order to get their LP investors into new flagship funds. So I think about it, John. A year ago, we were talking about David Solomon, in terms of its strategy, consumer, retail. Does this really make sense? And they've cleaned that up, and now they're positioned really to be a leader, as they should be, in the major businesses they serve.
So Ken, the numbers giving you a rosy picture, and the market's somewhat reflecting that, but not to a huge degree. We're not even up 1% at this point, and I can't help but wonder if it's a miss for investment banking, specifically advisory fees, just rising 7%. What do you make of that? Because this had been the cash cow for so many of the banks we've already heard from before.
Yeah, so the street analysts have a target price of $470. We're at $488. The stock has done great. I think there's more room on the upside because it still trades as a significant discount to the S&P 500. Additionally, to my point, the M&A that we have seen so far this year have been corporates. It have not been the financial sponsors, which have $1 trillion that has to exit either in a transaction like M&A or an IPO. And we're going to hear that from Blackstone later this week and KKR next week. So Goldman is in a great position where they can be an intermediary to execute those trades. But now it's book of business in the area that's going to get this stock a higher multiple. Asset and wealth management has over $300 trillion in alternative investments. That's where the market's going. It's private credit. It's in these very attractive areas that these banks can take market share, in some cases from traditional banks.
And Goldman has raised a lot of money in that regard. That recent $20 billion private credit fund, out of this world. But Ken, does that mean that this is going to be an earnings season of two banks, the banks who have that private asset management arm and those that are exposed to the consumer?
I think the analysts on the street are, and the conversation last week was, should we be in large banks or small? And clearly the diversified large banks are winning. But within those that have a more concentration into the areas that you've just mentioned versus worries about consumer delinquencies and lower net interest income, the Bank of America's, the cities, and Wells Fargo. We saw it with Wells Fargo last week. Last point for me is that after the Fed stress test in June, Goldman's increasing their dividend 9% for the third quarter. They still have some issues with the convoluted formula of the stress test, so they're going back to the Fed.
Ken, we've talked a lot about tech stocks and this big runaway rally. I don't think we've talked enough about the performance on the banks. We tried to do that more over the last week. You mentioned Bank of America. They'll report in the next 24 hours or so. They're up 24% so far this year. Goldman's up 24, close to 25% higher. Citi's still up by 25 percentage points. That's the bank story. I wanted to go through the broader story with you this morning, Ken, as well. Let's just go through two asset classes. Start with equities and I'll turn to bonds as well. Equity futures up again this morning, but the outperformance is on the small caps, the Russell, up another 1 percentage point. And Ken, if you look at the bond market, Danny did a great job of this earlier this morning, just thinking about the political considerations here, the so-called Trump trade, steeper yield curve, high yields at the long end of the curve, the 10-year up by 4 basis points, the 30-year up by 6. Ken, after the weekend's event, tragic events, almost a whole lot worse than it could have been. Can I just wonder how you're processing the political considerations when it comes to markets?
Well, I think the markets are still listening to the Fed and Jay Powell's comments last week, and I think strategists will be raising their target prices even if they're 5,600. The markets are resilient. We see S&P 500 earnings going this year up 8 or 9% to 15% next year. And if that's true, and we have that kind of healthy economy next year, that will be a great platform in terms of equity investing. Relative to technology, which has done the best, financial sector is moving a little bit below the S&P 500, but the large banks are 17% up this year, right where the S&P 500, but they trade at a significant discount on valuation. In the case of the 500 at 20 times, banks are at 10 times. So we might have a little bit more room for the banks, and I like the dispersion or breadth for the market. That's a healthy sign.
Ken, if you think the markets are just focused on Jay Powell, are they looking through then all of this politics? And how do you explain then a morning like today?
So the probabilities of a rate cut in September have increased. I think most are now looking for 2 cuts and what that could mean. It's always a two-edged sword with banks because you play into the mechanics of net interest income. Rates go down, you get narrower spreads, net interest margins tighten. This is what bank analysts will say. But if you do that in the backdrop, when you look at the flywheels of a stronger economy, volumes are higher and the loan balances offset even if you have lower rates. So we're not going to zero rate. So we get a pretty good picture here for financials, particularly some of the large banks. The worries are really as you go downstream, where you have smaller banks who are 65 to 75% of your revenue is net interest income.
Hey, Ken, good to catch up with you, sir. Ken Leon there of CFRA on the financials. Former President Donald Trump touching down in Milwaukee ahead of the Republican National Convention just 2 days after an assassination attempt at a rally in Pennsylvania. Trump looking to unify the Republican Party, telling the Washington Examiner he's rewriting his speech. And he's also calling on former presidential candidate Nikki Haley to attend the event. Joining us now is Jim Gilmore, the former Republican governor of Virginia. Governor, wonderful to have you with us this morning. Thank you, sir. We came within an inch of you and I having a very, very different conversation this morning. Governor, how do you expect the RNC to shift this week?
Well, first of all, the RNC, of course, won't. The primaries have already nominated overwhelmingly President Trump to be the Republican nominee. So the convention is really about sending a message to the people of the United States about what kind of party we are and what kind of people that we're going to be and what kind of platform and we're going to offer. That's very different from the rhetoric that we've been seeing over the last few weeks. President Biden went on camera and said last night, well, we need to stop all of this talk. But President Biden doesn't have the credibility to say that. It is he who has been ramping up this extreme language. President Biden has been doing that. I made a statement last week that it didn't look good for a chief executive for the President of the United States to be talking like this, but I really underestimated it. What he was really doing was inviting the assassination and inviting, I think, other assassins who may be out there right now when he uses language like that President Trump is a menace, that the Republican Party is a threat to democracy. These things are nonsense. but they're dangerous. They're dangerous kind of rhetoric. And most importantly, it's dangerous because it's coming from a president of the United States who has eminent credibility when he says these things. He should stop right now and stop saying these kinds of things.
Governor, what does the former president need to say to make sure that he has a message, one of unity and overcoming the toxic political environment that this nation faces?
Well, I believe he's going to talk about the issues that face the country. I think he's going to be talking about the unity that the Republican Party feels about the direction of the nation. I think that you'll find Republicans up and down the line and people particularly represented within that convention itself speaking about the issues of inflation, which President Biden absolutely caused by his big, giant programs at the beginning of his administration, when he threw all this money out there into the community. When he did that, he increased inflation. There's no doubt about that. The border has turned out to be a principal issue. The Democrats have just simply not addressed that issue. I remind you that only when President Trump began his campaign years ago did the issue even begin to be discussed. So I think there will be that. And then crime in the streets. I remind you that Antifa and organizations like that were running rampant in the streets, right? And when you then add this kind of strident, hysterical language coming from the chief executive of the United States, you create a toxic atmosphere.
Governor, what about his vice presidential pick? Is there a name that exudes more unity than others?
I don't think I want to try at my place to suggest a name. The names have been widely discussed. What I think I would prefer to do is to remind your viewers of the absolute importance of the pick at this particular time. Look at where we are here. President Biden made a pick. He said explicitly that he was going to make that pick based upon race and gender. That is the new program of the Democratic Party, race and gender. And he said, I'm going to name a black woman no matter what. I have no objection to a black woman being president or vice president, but to name the person based on that rips away the previous plan, which is to name somebody who can be president of the United States. I think that right now there's a consensus that Vice President Harris probably should not play that role. So there we are. So what this teaches us now is that we really at this point have to pick somebody who, if there is an assassination or a tragedy like that, the person can actually be the president of the United States. I think that President Trump has several names that he can pick from, and I hope that he's wise in his choice.
Is it fair to say that Senator J.D. Vance wouldn't be one based on that, Governor?
I think that Senator Vance is a new senator from Ohio. He's primarily known for writing his book, which I have read carefully. And a United States senator is always in the national spotlight. There are a lot of other people who might be picked as well, of course.
We're all familiar with the names. One name that, of course, we're very familiar with is Nikki Haley. Governor, there was a phone call that took place Saturday night. I just wonder how important that phone call was to someone like yourself that would like to see this party unite behind the one candidate. A phone call between the former president, Donald Trump, and Nikki Haley herself. Nikki Haley will now appear reportedly at the convention this week. How important was that development for you, sir?
At the conclusion of the South Carolina primary, I organized a group of about a dozen prominent conservatives and sent a letter to Nikki Haley. I'm not sure she ever even saw it. But in that letter, we said this is the time to get out and to endorse President Trump and to create some unity. She did not do that. Instead, she stayed in. She became basically the repository of anti-Trump votes. And as a result of that, she stayed in, I think, too long. However, President Trump is exuding some leadership here and an effort to actually unite the Republican Party by asking her to speak. That, I think, is a gesture of unity that is going to be the theme of the Republican National Convention.
Governor, she also is saying that she wants her delegates. She's releasing them. She wants them to vote for the former president. She represents half your party. Does she not? Isn't she still a voice that many in your party look to? So shouldn't she be welcomed in instead of forced out?
I think she should be welcomed in. I think that everybody that ran against the President Trump should be welcomed in. I think you should look to the primary numbers and during the last several primaries where Governor Haley was in the race. and you could see the numbers of votes she was getting. I'm not sure that anybody at this point represents half of our party. I think that President Trump represents virtually all of our party, and that's the primary results were showing that.
Governor, appreciate your time this morning, sir. Thanks for being with us. Jim Gilmore there, the former Virginia governor. Former President Donald Trump expected to announce his pick for vice president at the RNC this week. Trump set to address the convention on Thursday, with his VP pick expected to be announced well before then. Joining us now after the tragic events of the weekend, I'm pleased to say, is Ambassador John Bolton, a former National Security Advisor and former ambassador to the United Nations. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you, sir, for being with us once again. It's good to catch up with you. So I want to lean on your experience. You've been to events with the former President Donald Trump. You've seen the degree of security that's provided. How surprised were you that something like this could happen Saturday evening?
Well, it was obviously very surprising. There's been a lot of commentary on what went wrong, what mistakes were made. I think it was right for President Biden to say he's going to set up an independent review. None of us are experts just because we watch it on television. I've been a protectee. I still am for various reasons. But that doesn't make me an expert on peripheral control and things like that. So I think we're fortunate that Trump was only wounded. It's a tragedy that one of the spectators was killed. But we need to do the review of this in a calm way. I think do it quickly as well, because there are already conspiracy theories about what happened on Saturday that I think are Looney Tunes, but I don't think they're going to go away until we have an independent, objective review.
Ambassador, we're going to be starting the RNC. It's kicking off right after this assassination attempt. What kind of message do you think the former president is going to bring to the RNC? Because already in an interview with the Washington Examiner, he says he's rewriting his entire speech.
Well, he probably believed that when he said it. Whether it turns out to be true is anybody's guess. Certainly the mood of the country, I think, is such that it would be the right thing to do to try and calm partisan tempers down. And that's what he may well do. It would also be to his electoral advantage. I think he's the image of defiance that he gave when he was shot. And what he said since then puts him in a very good position, just to be coldly analytical about it. And it would be, I think, in his interest to have a message of conciliation. Now, whether he's able to do that or not, I don't know. But if you focus the argument on what's best for Donald Trump, I think that is the answer, and that may be why he does it.
You've said in the past that you think the highest priority for his VP pick is absolute loyalty to him, the man, Donald Trump. Do you think following these events and the fact that you said, in cold analysis, what's best for him is to talk about unity, maybe uniting the party and the country, would it be to pick someone more towards the center?
Well, Trump doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't really do policy. So for him, there is no left, right, or center. There's only Donald Trump at the center of the universe. I think at this point, it is still possible any of the names that have been mentioned can be picked. I don't think he settled on a name a week ago. I don't think it's changed since Saturday. I think this is a constant matter of reevaluation for him up until the last minute. I always used to say that with Trump, nothing is final until it's final, and then maybe not even then.
Ambassador, one of the historical corollaries a lot of people have used for this is 1981, an attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan. His daughter wrote an op-ed in the New York Times over the weekend saying that her father had believed that she'd been saved for God for a reason, and that was to end the Cold War. This feeling of emboldenment of foreign policy, do you think Trump will feel that same sense that he now has a mandate for certain policies that he wants to push through more forcefully should he end up being the president?
Well, I don't think we can say for sure. I mean, it's obviously a shocking event to be at a political rally, to be shot at, to be wounded, to be in danger for some period of time. That has to have an effect on anybody. But Trump has a remarkable gyroscope that although he has a short attention span for many things, he has a fixed attention span on himself. And I think that using this attempt on his life as a way of proving his martyrdom and the victim narrative that he has so successfully used politically, I think he will use. Now, whether that translates into specific action if he's elected, I think is harder to say, but will he use it politically to maximize his options once elected? Absolutely.
That of political martyrdom, Ambassador Bolton, you're describing something that seems like it could fan the flames of division within this country. How concerned are you about that this is a start of an era that's been bubbling back in the surface for so long that it brings it to a boiling point?
No, look, we've had boiling points in this country. One was called the Civil War. We're nowhere close to that, rhetoric to the contrary notwithstanding. I think Trump could cause a lot of damage if he's reelected. I've been saying that for several years now. I do not think he is an existential threat to our democracy, and I think it's in fact harmful to say that. That's the kind of rhetoric I think we could do without. I think Trump focuses on what he wants to do, not on grand historical themes, and I think his focus at the moment is very much on how to use the upcoming convention to maximize the chances he'll win in November.
Ambassador, you've questioned his fitness for office. You've clearly just drawn a distinction between doing that and questioning whether he is an existential risk to democracy. I want to understand his potential to unite this party. You are a Republican. You've worked with Donald Trump. You worked with Bush. You worked in the Reagan presidency as well. What would it take, Ambassador, for Donald Trump to get you behind him and unite this party? Is that even possible?
No, because I do think Trump is not fit to be president. It's I don't wish ill to anybody, certainly not to the innocent spectators who were killed and gravely wounded, or to Donald Trump for what he was put through. But that episode doesn't change my fundamental view of him. Maybe he'll have a Damascene conversion. That's always possible too. Redemption is a reality. It can happen. But as of now, I don't see that that's going to change anything. I do think this event, I'm just being cold-blooded here, this event will politically benefit Donald Trump. And we may look back at the debate, the presidential debate, and now the events of Saturday and say this was the moment when Biden's campaign trajectory went into a nosedive from which it never escaped.
If you don't think he's fit to be president, is there a VP pick that would assuage your concerns?
No, because we might still get 4 years of Donald Trump, and I worry, and I don't believe the facts have changed about the concern that personal loyalty to Trump, not loyalty to the country, not loyalty to the Constitution, loyalty to a man who told Mike Pence to violate his oath of office on January the 6th, 2021, that will remain Trump's primary objective. So we'll see who it is, but I worry that whoever that person turns out to be, they'll have given the wrong answer to that question.
Ambassador, you have a deep understanding of foreign policy and international security. A long amount of experience on those issues. Can we finish on that? Ambassador, how do you think the adversaries, the enemies of this country, will be viewing the developments of the last couple of weeks? Not just the last weekend, but for the issues the sitting president is facing as well. Ambassador, how are you thinking about that at the moment?
Well, divisions within the American body politic are a tonic for foreign adversaries. And I think they're watching this whole process very closely. They know that the United States has a fixed amount of bandwidth at any given time. We've got a war in Ukraine. We've got war in the Middle East. We've got a very divisive political season underway. And adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are undoubtedly thinking to themselves, are there things we can do right now to take advantage of this disarray? They'll follow it through the campaign season, and I think that could be a very vulnerable time, not necessarily for the United States directly, but for friends and allies around the world.
Is there a part of the world that you're more concerned, perhaps an area you're more concerned than others?
Well, I think the one area that we don't have actual conflict at the moment is the Indo-Pacific periphery around China. We've been concerned about Taiwan, the South China Sea, China's land borders with Vietnam, India. I think if you're looking for a place where conflict could break out before November, it would be along that periphery.
Ambassador, appreciate your time this morning. Hopefully we can do this again soon. Ambassador John Bolton there on the future of this particular presidency.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in markets, economics and geopolitics. You can watch the show live on Bloomberg TV weekday mornings from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify or anywhere else you listen. And as always, on the Bloomberg Terminal and the Bloomberg Business app.